Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of People and Politics. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to my channel by clicking the button below. I'd be very grateful. Joining me today is somebody who was elected to the Scottish Parliament in 2016. She served in Cabinet under Nicola Sturgeon and she resigned again in 2023 because of the gender recognition bill. She stood as a candidate for the leadership of the SNP but lost out to Hamza Yusuf. I'm very grateful today to welcome Ash Regan onto the show. Welcome to People and Politics. Ash Regan, thank you very much for coming on to the show today. It's really nice to meet you.
My pleasure. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I'm always grateful for all my guests to do the show with me because I'm really enjoying doing it. And I was having a look at your background, and I think you're a native, a figure in the borders, but you grew up in Devon and spent time in London, but you came back to Edinburgh or Scotland around the time of the first referendum. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your journey from London or Devon back to politics.
Yeah. So I grew up in Biggar, and I lived there till I was about 10. So I went to primary school there, and then my family, we moved down south. So we ended up in Devon, and I lived there till I went to university. Went off to university, and then after university, I went to live in London. But I always really was very conscious of my sort of Scottish identity, if you like, and it was important to me, and it felt like it was something that was quite a strong part of my identity. And I always, even though I didn't, by the time I was probably in my 20s, I didn't have much of a Scottish accent, but I would always say to people, oh, I'm from Scotland and things like this, which did result in some quite creative teasing when I went to work in London. And I think there was some World Cup on or something, and I remember people putting things on my desk and, just trying to take the mickey, basically. So, but it was fairly good natured, I would say. Anyway, when I was looking to start a family, where I just sort of decided I didn't want to do that in London and wanted to come back to Scotland. So came back up in 2003, and then I've been in Scotland ever since. But yeah, in the borders.
Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the world. And the border, I meet so many people. And the important thing, I lived in Manchester. I've met many people go to London for a while, but they hang on to you. You really hang on to your Scottish identity. You really want to come back here in the future. And that's what you did. And so at what point in your career or your life did you get really interested in politics? Were your family political?
Yeah. So I would say they were political, but not. So on my mum's side, my mum's dad used to be, and this is going back to the 1950s, an election agent for the Labour Party in the 50s. And my mum's uncle, or a great uncle it might be, was an MP in the 40s for the Labour Party, and he became a junior minister in that post-war administration that did lots of great things like introducing the NHS and so on. I never met him though. Obviously, he actually died. I think he died quite early on, so I never unfortunately got an opportunity to meet him, even if I was quite small. So there is kind of, that sort of side of politics in my family. On the other side, my dad, although there wasn't anybody elected on that side of my family, my dad was quite interested in politics, and he would talk about politics quite a lot. And so it was quite normal in my family to have a discussion at dinner, when you're eating your dinner, about politics. And it was the 1980s. And so it invariably was, what awful thing Thatcher was doing this week.
Mhm.
Yeah. And particularly, you know, she was doing awful things to Scotland at that point. So I think that was fairly formative to me, in that I remember exactly where I was when I got the news that Thatcher had gone, you know, and I think I think I was 16 or 17. I think that's fairly unusual, to have that sort of level of interest in politics at that age. And so I then went on to do a politics degree. I did international relations, which I really enjoyed. And I did think at that time I would like to get into politics, but I didn't really know how to go about it. I didn't have any family connections, because I think that's quite normal for people if they know someone who can get them a job as a researcher, and they kind of progress up that way. And I didn't have any of those contacts. And so I didn't really know how to get into politics, and I kind of just forgot about it for a while. And I also think had a bit of an inkling as well, even at that age, that you'd have to toe the party line. And I think that as somebody who has probably always had a slightly rebellious streak, that maybe didn't sound so great even to my younger self. So I didn't come back in, I didn't really start actively doing anything in politics until the independence referendum, which I got involved in right from the beginning. And I, obviously as a volunteer, and I volunteered for Women for Independence.
Right.
So I did a lot of speaking at events for them. And I was involved in Commonweal as well. And I was involved in my local Yes group too, and did lots of sort of local campaigning for them. So I did all the things. I did manning the street stalls, I did the leafleting, I was speaking at events, you know, doing all of that, and really enjoyed it. And at the end of that, you know, obviously I was devastated by the result and us not winning, because at one point, I think when that final poll came out showing that Yes was just slightly ahead, and I began to think, oh, you know, we might win this. So then obviously it was really devastating that we didn't win. Then after that point, I thought, maybe I should think about, you know, getting into elected politics, which I then did, getting selected for Edinburgh Eastern, I think in 2015.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And around the you were elected in 2015, and you worked as you were in Nicola Sturgeon's cabinet, and you had the role of community safety minister. What did that involve? Community safety.
Yeah, so I got elected in 2016, and then I was a backbencher for 2 years, and then I got promoted when Nicola did a reshuffle in 2018, and I was a junior minister in justice. So community safety involved things like antisocial behaviour. Had responsibility for the fire service. It was involved in things like, I did the fireworks legislation as part of that role. So it was generally about, you know, trying to keep people safe, and, you know, that sort of. There was also quite a bit on legal affairs, actually. So the previous person who'd had the job had the title, I think it was community safety and legal affairs. So there was a lot of responsibility for legislation as well in that role. So it was an interesting role.
But I want to bring a bit further on to the leadership question in 20. Did you really want to be the leader of the SNP?
I think I was looking, and obviously by this point I had gone through, you know, resigning as a minister, watching the party, as I would see it, you know, becoming increasingly obsessed by an ideology that I feel that the public, you know, the public don't support that ideology. That's not the way most people out there in the world think of things. And not just on that issue, you know, there were other issues as well. So I think the party's attitude, particularly to things like the oil and gas sector, to highly protected marine areas, to the deposit return scheme, there was a mounting number of policy areas where I thought that the SNP was really disregarding, I thought, common sense and also public opinion on these issues. And I wanted an opportunity. I think the party needed reform. I was quite clear about that when I stood. I felt that it was going in the wrong direction in a number of areas, and it needs to be brought back. And I think particularly for me, the main issues were women's rights. Obviously, I think, and I would argue that many people would agree with this now, that the SNP government cannot be trusted to protect women's rights. I think many people would agree with that statement. and also that the SNP has lost its focus on independence. And for, I joined the party because I wanted Scotland to become an independent country. I think that's probably why the majority of people join the SNP. Not all of them. Again, there'll be some people in there that have different views, but for the most part, people see the SNP as the political vehicle, if you like, to get to independence. And I felt they'd really taken their eye off the ball on that over recent years. And I wanted to see progress. I wanted to see us get to a position where we could put that choice back to the people of Scotland in one way or another to move us on in independence, rather than what I saw, which I feel is what the SNP are doing at the moment, which is sort of treading water, waiting for Westminster to just give in and hand you something. I don't think that it's realistic to wait for Westminster to do something. I think with Westminster, you have to see them as your, adversary, is maybe the way to put it. And, it's your job as the political party that wants independence to work as hard as possible to come up with options to let the people of Scotland express themselves in that way, to see if they want to vote for independence. So I was frustrated with a lot of the things that the SNP were doing. And so eventually I came to the decision that it probably wasn't the right party for me in the end. But yes, no, when I was in the leadership contest, I was very focused on the things that I thought the SNP could perhaps do differently. And I was, had I been successful, I would have pursued those things. I would have done all I could, to put us on the path to independence, and hopefully restored some trust with the electorate on the way that the party was governing, certainly on issues like women's rights and other issues as well, some of the ones I've mentioned.
And when you talk about SNP party ideology, and the eye of the ball for independence, what do you mean? Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, obviously, under Alex Salmond, the party secured a referendum. That was in 2014. And I think that many people would consider that 10 years later, you might have had some kind of plan of how Scotland would become independent. But I don't see that the SNP have any kind of plan to get to independence. That's my personal view. Other people might not share that. But I don't know if you've been watching some of the stuff I've been doing in the Scottish Parliament recently, where I've been really trying to pin down the Scottish Government, and particularly the Independence Minister, on, we've got 2 years left, basically, in this parliamentary term, on what the SNP are doing. Obviously, they've got a pro-independence majority. They cannot be voted down in the Scottish Parliament. If everybody from the pro-independence parties votes for something en masse, they will get it. It's not like Westminster, where, the SNP and ALBA can be voted down every single time because of the way that the numbers work down there. So my view is they should be using that pro-independence majority we've got for 2 years. They should have a plan and a strategy of how to move us forward. And as far as I can look, and as much as I've asked questions about it, I don't think that the SNP have got a credible answer to that at the moment.
So what would your plan be to move us forward? Because I think you said that you saw that some people were relying too heavily on the political route, and then what for other routes you're thinking is more effective?
Well, it's the political party's job to go down a political route. That is part of what they're there to do. So my plan and ALBA's plan is that the Scottish Parliament, so there's a couple of legal opinions that support this, that the Scottish Parliament does have the power to hold a referendum on the powers, if you like, of the Scottish Parliament. So it'd be a referendum on extending the powers of the Scottish Parliament to include the ability to negotiate for independence and legislate for independence. So that would be an option to go to the Scottish public and ask them if they want to extend the powers of the Parliament. So let's say a majority of the public voted for that. So you'd have that as a message to the world. It couldn't be disputed. It'd be a free and fair election that would be held. That message would be out there. Then if you let's say you run the next Scottish election in 2026, as you put Scottish independence on the ballot, and you say, so this is the argument that I was putting forward when I was in the SNP leadership contest, that you run that election as an opportunity for the people of Scotland to choose to send a message that they want to be an independent country. So you're using an election, which is quite a normal way to do that. Referendums are one way of doing it, but they're not the only way. The ballot box is an acceptable substitute. And we are in a position where the UK government doesn't want to give Scotland a referendum. It's blocking that route to get to for Scotland to express that view. And so if you use the ballot box, those elections are occurring anyway, and you can use them as an opportunity for Scotland to make its choice. You could do that by asking or inviting, that's probably a better way to put it, all the pro-independence parties to stand on the same footing, so that you could vote for ALBA, you could vote for the Green Party, you could vote for the ISP, or, any SNP, any party that is pro-independence, knowing that your vote would contribute to that overall majority if we got one. And if you did both of those things, so if you got a majority for both of those two things, I would say that is a double lock, where you are expressing, Scotland is expressing something that's verifiable, that the world can see. And I think at that point, you would then go and negotiate with Westminster, not for another referendum, but to leave the UK.
But you can't assume because somebody votes for the SNP or the Green Party, parties have a whole range of policies. Some of which people agree with, some people don't. I think it's very unusual for somebody to vote for a party that they agree with everything they say. So I don't know how you can take a vote for the Greens, say, and make that into a vote for independence. Because I'm very conscious, they've done that with the Brexit vote. For example, I voted to remain in the EU, but for some reason, the SNP have taken my vote as a vote for them, to think that suddenly, because I voted to remain, the SNP represent me. The SNP don't represent me. Some of us respect democracy, and so I don't see how you can make one issue into a referendum when people are voting on dozens of issues, general issues. I just don't.
They can be voting on dozens of issues. I think that if you were to ask people about the manifestos of the political parties that they voted for, I think usually for most people, a couple of issues, are going to stand out for them, or a perception of how that political party will deal with those issues is why they'll vote for them. So I don't think it's beyond the wit of the country to come up with, if we said, right, this is what we're going to do in this election. If the pro-independence party signed up to it, it would be the first line of their manifesto. You can also put it on the ballot paper as well. So I don't know if you remember, I think Alex Salmond might have been the first one to do it when on the ballot paper. Do you remember when it said Alex Salmond for First Minister? So that was the first time I think somebody had done that. So you can actually add a description as well. So you could say, Scottish National Party for an Independent Scotland, ALBA Party for independence, so people can then see it's on the ballot paper. It's very clear what people are voting for.
But even if it's on the ballot paper, people are voting for a whole range of things. For example, with the Green Party, for example, they profess to be, an environmental party, but they still don't. Green credentials won't go, but so I don't see how you can jump from somebody voting for green policy is suddenly definitely voting for independent. I do not.
I think if you make sure that you're very clear up front about what a vote would be for any particular election. I mean, it happens all the time. So let's say, there is an election. I mean, it might happen in this election that's coming up, the general election, where the SNP might come out and say, a vote for us this time is not for independence. A vote for us this time is to stay in the EU, or whatever the slogan is at the time. Now, I think that is taken into account by the electorate. And you could say to people, if you were in the Green Party and you decided, and it's no guarantee they would sign up to this kind of arrangement, but if they did, and they knew that, there are some people in there who particularly vote for them, but don't want independence, but do want their environmental policies, you'd be upfront about people and say, well, in this election, you should vote for us because you want that, we're standing particularly on an independence mandate, and you should vote for us for that purpose. And then people can make a choice. They can decide, right, well, actually, I'm not for independence. On this occasion, I'm going to put my vote, I'm going to decide what is important to me. And if that's not it, I'm going to put my vote somewhere else. So if you were a Green voter and you're not pro-independence, you might in that election, and we know the public do this, the public make a lot of sophisticated decisions about who to vote for and why. The public, that voter would then decide, right, actually, in this election, I won't vote Green. I'm going to vote for another party that represents my views better. And people do this all the time. They make a decision, they go into the voting booth. I mean, we know that people, might even think a few months before they're going to vote in a certain way. And we knew this with a referendum, that people then went into the booth and when they thought about it, stood there looking at the ballot paper, and made a choice one way or the other, maybe contrary to what they thought they were going to do.
Yeah, okay, so let's imagine that the majority of people voted for pro-independence parties.
Yeah.
For instance, what are you going to do then? You say you're going to negotiate with Westminster. They've made it pretty clear that they're not on for negotiating for independence.
Yeah. No, they have said that, and I think you would expect them to say that at this point. They're not going to come out and say, "Oh well, actually, if you vote for it, then we will have to negotiate, and eventually we will come to the table." They won't say that now for obvious reasons. So we can only look to history, and we can look at the number of countries, and there are quite a sizable number of countries that have left. What was, Great Britain and the Commonwealth over. It's quite a long period now. We are going back a distance. But if you look at some of those countries, many of them left because they voted in an election, not a referendum, but an election. And in all of those cases, so 100% of those cases, the UK government or Great Britain started off by saying, "Oh, we don't accept this, we won't negotiate." But 100% of the time, they did come to the table and they did eventually negotiate. So you can look at all the list of those different countries and see that. Now, I think at that point, if you were struggling to get the UK government to come to the table, I think you then appeal to the international community because, like I said, these elections would have been documented, and there would be, there'd be a credible election result, and this is meant to be, a democracy. So I think we'd have to be quite careful if we're going to say that, ministers in the UK government would not respect a UK election, because this is a democracy. This is what the people had voted for. So I think they would eventually come to the table. But the other thing you can do is you could use disruptive tactics. So, for the SNP, they certainly have at the moment a lot of MPs, and they could certainly be using them to disrupt the business at Westminster in the event that the UK government did not want to come to the table to negotiate. And it's through these sort of things that you would assume the UK government would eventually come to the table to negotiate.
But people voting MPs up here to go down to Westminster to represent us, to target them, and you're saying that they should disrupt business. Is that a more effective use of the
Well,
really?
What I'm saying is that's right. They are elected to represent their constituents. So if their constituents have voted for Scotland to become an independent country, and they're down there representing them, and the UK government refused to engage on that point, then I think that would be legitimate, yes.
I still think the only way to do it is by the democratic process or referendum. But my thoughts are that if the parties really want, if they really want independence, I feel like they're going about it the wrong way. Because, for example, the trash education system, we have the widening attainment gap, we have the lowest PISA score, math and numeracy rates are lower than they've ever been. As this SNP strategy is to is to run the country into the ground. So they can say, oh, it's their fault at Westminster if we and them. And I feel like they're going about it the wrong way. But
I don't think that is their strategy, by the way. But I'm not here to speak for them. But I was part of the government, and no, I wouldn't agree with that. And actually, if you look back at the SNP, obviously they have been in for quite a long time now. I think they were running the government very effectively, certainly in the early days. And a number of observers would admit that to you. Even people that were not naturally SNP supporters would have said to you that they were running the government and the country effectively, and I think they were. What I think has crept in over the last few years, as I said, is a focus on probably what many people would think of as quite niche issues. My view is there's far too much legislation going through the parliament, and that actually government and ministerial time should be spent on the issues that you've described. So the things that are important to people of Scotland. So there was a recent poll out, and it put the concerns of the people of Scotland, and it was ranking them. I think it was something like the top 20. And it won't be a surprise to you, the NHS came top. So you've got cost of living, NHS, education, economy, that sort of thing, all in the top. So that means that should be a guide as to what you should spend your ministerial time doing. And you also have to look at what you're getting from inputs. So I would argue that it's quite easy to say, and I think Nicola Sturgeon did this very extensively, is it's quite easy to communicate to the public as well. So if you say, oh, well, we've paid for 1,000 more teachers or 1,000 more police, that could be true. And obviously that is a good thing. Easy for everybody to understand. But what you have to watch is you have to link that up to outcomes. What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve from that? And make that your goal, not the inputs as such, but the outcomes, getting to where you want to be. So if where you want to be is, you want to have a world-class education system, then you have to focus on how do you get to that point.
But we used to have a world-class education system. At one time, the Scottish education system was the envy of the world. But after 17 years of SNP rule, they've run it into the ground, and they're too, they're obsessed with testing 4-year-olds, and I think they've failed a generation of Scottish young people. They really have.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, when I went to primary school in Scotland, I mean, we're going back quite a long time now. My memories of that are not great. I would certainly, and so that would be probably the very early 80s.
Yeah.
And I would say that wasn't a very nice learning environment. There were still caning people, when I first got there. And it was, I don't think it was as a great place to be a student in some ways, certainly not from my experience. So I would say that, our teachers are very dedicated. I think our schools are convicted in trying to provide a solid learning environment for our students. I think the context has changed. The world has moved on. We don't expect people to access and learn information in the same way. Obviously, when I was a girl, we didn't have the internet. There was no mobile phones. Things have completely changed. So yes, I think that they could do better. I think there definitely are issues in Scottish education, which we need to be looking at and addressing. And I sometimes think you have to update things as you go, and maybe what you would have done, I think you would find if you looked at perhaps the content of 1970s Scottish education, you would find there's a few things in there that you would want to change. I think that things do move on. So yeah, we've got to look at the context we're in. We obviously have challenges as well that are not of our making. There is definitely data that shows that poverty has an impact on a child's ability to learn, through various effects that has on the child and its environment, both at school and at home. And, the Scottish government, any Scottish government, that could be an SNP government or another political persuasion, would have some challenges in completely addressing that, because some of the drivers for that poverty are coming from the Westminster political system. So
some of the drivers, but it's completely within the powers of Hollywood to reduce child poverty.
No,
Yeah.
that statement would be true if Holyrood had an unlimited budget. Then yes, that would be true, because then whatever was happening at Westminster, if Westminster decided to just cancel social security payments, for instance, right, Holyrood could just say no problem, we'll just mitigate everything and we'll replace all of that and do better so that nobody lives in poverty. But that's not the situation we live in. So Scotland has there's a little bit of borrowing, a mostly fixed budget, in which the Scottish government any Scottish government would have to make choices. And it's not possible with the budget that we have right now to mitigate everything. Scottish government mitigates a lot, you'll know that. We spend hundreds of millions of pounds mitigating choices, particularly on social security, that Westminster has made previously, to make things better in Scotland. And things are slightly better in Scotland. I'll admit that, it's not an ambition of mine just to be slightly better than England. That's not good enough. We should be aspiring for Scotland to be a much better place to live, to grow up, a better place to be a child, and so on. So I'll say to you that yes, there's lots of things that could be done to improve things, but I don't accept that argument that Scotland, because we are still part of the UK, can just do things in a completely different way and fund everything, because that's not reality.
No, maybe they can't fund everything, but for example, they were offered social security control 6 years before they took it on. So they wouldn't shoulder the responsibility of social security for 6 years.
Yeah. Well, it takes time. I'm not defending them, but it does take time to set things up. As you can imagine, if you start up a new system, it is going to take time to get that system going. From what I've seen of it, it seems to work. It seems to be working a bit better than the system that the UK government has got.
Yeah, as you say, people point to the UK system and say that we're better than England. For example, I think they say we have a better health system in England, but the majority of sensible people would accept that we're a fraction of the population of England and Wales. So to argue that we're doing better in health up here is a non-argument, but we'll come, but that'll roll on. But we'll come back to that. So you join our party to focus more on independence, but we've got child poverty rates through the roof. We've got failing schools, we've got lower with no, and yet you think the answer to all these problems are more work, more effort, and independence.
Yes, I'm not saying that you can't address at least partially some of these things with really good Scottish government policy. Absolutely, you can, but the word there is partially. It's very clear to me that if you have a UK government that's making very different choices, and we always have to remember that we have to, for people that maybe haven't had much exposure to this, the level of departmental spending in England is directly linked to the money that the Scottish government gets. So political choices, not economic choices, but political, particularly when it's a Conservative government, those political choices to spend less in certain areas has a direct impact on how much Scotland has to spend. So it's one thing to say, you might be in administration in Scotland and you might say, right, health is my absolute priority and I'm going to spend, 55% of my budget on that. And that's fine, that's your priority. But if your budget is shrinking because of choices that are being made down south, that then makes you have to make a series of choices then. If you're going to fund the health service to that effect, then what else do you not fund? And in terms of the economy, if you're wanting to grow the economy, which is what up here, this is what the Conservatives always say, oh, well, you must focus on growing the economy. But one of the main ways, of course, that you grow the economy is to invest. And to do that, you need a capital budget. And in this last few years and into the next few years, the capital budget has been cut very much. That makes it difficult to then invest in things which then grow your economy. And then you get criticized for not growing the economy. Yeah. So, it's not, I don't want to say that I'm not defending the SNP. I think, they've done some good things. They've done some things that are not very good, like any government. But I do think that people who think that the Scottish government can run things in a vacuum and just fix all the problems that Scotland has, I don't think that's reality. We are part of the UK, and many of the things that we are suffering from, let's just look at the inflation rate that went up under Truss. That was not anything to do with the Scottish government or Scotland, and people in Scotland are suffered because of that. And that's because we are part of the UK.
That's right, but I feel that, people in Scotland, as all over the UK, are actually strapped for cash. They're struggling to pay mortgages, put food on the table, politics, but the answer to all our ills seems to be another divisive independent referendum.
The things you've just listed, mortgages, inflation due to Brexit and other issues, and the cost of living crisis and energy costs, they are all controlled by the UK government. So the fact that people's mortgages, mine included, have shot up because the bank of it, the mortgage rate has shot up, that is the UK government. The fact that energy prices have gone up, that is the UK government. The fact that inflation has meant that the money in everyone's pocket can buy less over the last few years, that is the UK government. Scottish government has the ability to control it over that. And even though Scotland is a rich country, and there's nobody that would dispute that to you, Scotland, if you were going to rank the countries of the world, Scotland would be right near the top. We're a big energy producer. We produce a lot of highly valuable goods onto the world economy. We've got a very educated population. So Scotland, if it was an independent country, I think would be better off. We would feel better off, and we would stop being influenced in this way. And I would say being sabotaged, because if you're trying to run the country and then you're, like it was was it last year or the year before, the inflation rate is at 8-9%. It's very difficult to do that because everything you're doing is costing more money. Hospitals are costing more to heat. Fuel is costing more to put in fire engines. It has this wide knock-on effect right across the whole of government.
Yeah. No, I completely agree in the thought Western side. But the other thing, I hope that you would agree that this debate is going to go on for a long, a long time, and it's good that we can have this debate, And
Yeah.
and there's one that I want to ask about, but it's kind of going back a bit in our conversation. And it's about the time you stood for leadership. I meant to ask you that time, do you think that was a fair contest?
I think if you looked at, I think the constitution or the standing orders of the party, leadership contests were meant to be conducted over a much longer time period. Right. So I would say if you changed the contest to make it very short, that was clearly beneficial to some parties and not others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say about Kate Forbes, she's phenomenally talented. She's really a very talented woman and would have been a fabulous, leader. But would you agree that her Christian faith tripped her up, or she got a lot of snash for her Christian faith at the time?
I don't know. I suppose there's a couple of schools of thought on this, because this applies to anybody that's seeking, I guess, to be a leader, a public office holder. As I think the public are entitled to understand what your views are about certain subjects and whether your faith or having no faith would impact on your decision making. I think probably the issue that I had with that is that I felt that there was a lot of attention put onto Kate and the fact that she was a member of a religion that wasn't the same as what was put onto Hamza, because Hamza is a Muslim. He's told me I think he's told me he's a practicing Muslim. So presumably, he would have faith choices that he might make. Yeah. And I think it's perfectly acceptable to then ask him, how his faith would influence him if, in those situations, which I think would be fair. So I felt it seemed to me it was very skewed towards Kate and not towards Hamza's, which didn't seem like it was even-handed. So yeah, that would be my observation on that.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to bring up because it made me feel really angry at the time because Kate kind of lost that because of her open, faith. And having that as a Muslim, and the very day after that he got elected, there was a photograph on the front of the Scotland of him and the men in their family do whatever they do on the carpet and Peter House. And I thought it was really awful, really real double standards and real. So it's almost as if being a Muslim is cool, but being a devout Christian is not okay. And it made me really upset at the time. I would, I'd given the choice. Yeah, I think it's totally unfair.
Yeah, I think many people who watched that and might have had the same views as you, that they felt that a lot of questions were directed at Kate, that perhaps could have been directed at Hamza but weren't. So
what about Hamza? Because Hamza, because, for example, Kate got a bad time because she didn't vote she didn't vote in favor of gay marriage or gay rights, which is fine. But neither did Hamza. Hamza avoided Hamza was
yeah, I had an issue. I did have an issue with that because I felt that for me, I mean, Kate's a friend of mine. I think we both said that during the contest. We're still friendly with each other, even having gone through that situation together.
I'm glad.
And Hamza, so I think it's perfectly reasonable, legitimate, acceptable to hold, to be of faith and to hold those views and to have that influence you when you're a leader or an office holder. But I think you have to, it's good if you can own up to it, come out and say why you've done certain things. So an issue I did have with it is that I knew that Hamza hadn't voted in that legislation. I had probably had an idea of why that was the case. But I felt that Hamza wasn't being honest with people about what had happened there. And I tried to ask him about that in one of the debates, and he sort of deflected onto different things. But personally, I think I have no issue with him not voting in that legislation or voting one way or the other. It's perfectly legitimate for people to hold those views and to vote however they think is right. I'm very much a proponent, obviously, of people voting in line with their own conscience, voting for the way they think things are. And I think then if you're able to explain that to the public, I think the people will understand that you have a view on something and you've voted accordingly. I think that's completely fine. What I don't like is people who've done something like that, but then they don't come clean about it. I think the public would have accepted the explanation had he given one, but he, I felt, was being disingenuous when he was being pressed on that particular vote.
Do you think his Muslim faith clouds his judgment? Because coming up to more recent times, I think it was just a week ago, he was advised by Scottish civil servants not to make a payment of, I think it's a further £250 million to Gaza, but he overruled them, presumably because he's a Muslim and he wants to stand up for Muslims. So, do you think that he's allowing his Muslim faith to cloud his judgment?
Well, only he would be able to answer you that. I mean, I'm sure, I won't speak for him, but I'm sure he would say, like Kate would say, or I would say, that your conscience, your views on certain things, perhaps your religion would be a guiding factor. I think it would be for anyone in the decisions that they make. So I think he will, I'm no doubt, people will ask him about that, and you'd have to ask him and let him tell you what he thinks. But I think lots of people are very concerned about Gaza. I'm very concerned about what's going on in the Middle East as well. So he is, he's the first minister. It's up to him to make the decisions about these things. But then, he will be scrutinized accordingly. People will rightly ask questions, and then it would be up to him to explain, why he's taken a particular course of action.
Yeah, Yeah, and I hope one day I get the chance to ask it. And then when it comes to is spending, I'll always trying to look like this world statesman where I was able to put his effort into the people of Glasgow as much as Gaza. And just go back to Kate Forbes. I'm really glad that you're a friend in person. I've invited her onto my show. I would love to chat to Kate because she's got a fascinating background and story. So
Mm.
if you're talking to her, you could
I will. If I see
yeah,
her this
I
week,
would be so
I'll
delighted.
big you up. I'll mention it.
I've been so grateful. She's really interesting. But I actually no, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you today. I really enjoy talking, and I'm very, very grateful for your time.
Not at all. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and when I put the show together, I'll send it to you. Maybe you could pass it around your networks. I'd be
Will
very
do.
grateful. And yeah, thank you very much again. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Okay.